Chapter 12, tm55202, Air Brakes and Accessories. Operation Maintenance Manual tm55202, Chapter 12, Air Brakes and Accessories. Operation Maintenance Diesel Electric Locomotive. 115 air supply system. Compressed air is usually operated in the air system's reverse electrical pneumatic contactor, standards, window wipers, bells, and some designs of shutter level throttle valve, pneumatic control switch. Similar equipment. The main reserve has a look at the kept the pressure of 125 to 140 pounds. Air supplied with the brake system. Main reserve through the feed with the valve of 70 to 90 pound control air speed. Air system supplied with the main compressor through the reducing valve, controlling the reserve. Suitable standards checking the valve. The system includes the necessary cutout cocks. Gauges if the pressure is too low, the reverse electric pneumatic contactors operate and locomotive will not move. 1 in 16, the air filters. A large supply of clean air required of the air compressor. Dirt and grit in any form matters taken in the equipment of the air causes the wear of the equipment. The failure air service improved with the maintenance is reduced with the good air filters. The principal requirements for good air filters are small resistances to the passageway of air, the high ducts retaining capacity, erasing the cleaning, easy of cleaning, ability to operate a long time without cleaning, and attention, small and compact, moderate first in cost, and moderate first cost, low operating expenses. B oil impingement type of filter consists of layers which were wire mesh coated with the oil which collects dust, and dust will air pass through. The filters may be flat, circle, cylindrical, and use air to detect the mesh of the filter. Either becomes the clogged oil with the oil as the reverb drives out, and otherwise loses the diverse protected properties in all factors lower the effectiveness of the filter. Proper oiling and cleaning should be regularly performed. The two air intake strainers in each of the low pressure cylinders and are the out of the cartridge type of the permanent removal of the strainer element without necessity dismounting and disconnecting the air from the air compressor. As for air passing through the strainer or the entrance of the compressor tank of the strainer element should not be cleaned in the alkali-free hydrocarbon solvent, dried and then dipped and given lubricating oil bath after the oil has been drained off is ready to be back in service. Direct deposit the metal wire mesh covered with the dislodged charging strainer and using the dry compressed air. 117, the compressor. Generally, the air supplied by the air compressor mesh may be the engine driven directly to belts and flexible coupling. The shaft of the main generator, the independent motor that is driven in the installation found in some of the locomotives. The major feature of the various compressors are similar to the others in paragraph 233. The maintenance of the procedures description of the typical compressor the follows. The construction. The typical compressor consists of a low pressure cylinder, one high pressure cylinder, two low pressure cylinders, or one of the either can readily distinguish from the high pressure one because of the high low diameter of the three. The automatic type of the connector rod of the forge of the steel indicated they applied with the two common crankshafts. Each of the rod has an individual bearing on the shaft lubrication of the crankshaft directing the pressure of the feed through the drills. The crankshaft connecting rod of the rifle drilled with the Winston piston, which also supplied with the lubrication under the pressure. Okay, here's an air piping system. This is the control cabinet with the force and reverser and the contactors and parallel circuit and switches and parallel 2 to control which has which controls back. I guess we should start over here by the air compressor with has the breather intake floater, low pressure cylinder filling hold, low pressure cylinder intake, compressor coil, compressor intercoiler which goes to a drain with also 60 pound safety valves, while the breed goes to a cooling pipe. Number 1 reserved the drain, the number 2 reserved, and then to the dirt collector or back to the cooler control reserve by first passing through the strainer and checker reduce valve, and then back into the controls of the control cabinet as in control air cabinet. But if it goes from the number 2 reserved into the dirt collector, then it may go down into the cutout operating valve section with the sand traps and the cutting operating valve into the bell. Other number 2 reserves may go straight into the brake system to steam the heat of the boiler at 100 horsepower with the road twister if used with a drain and 23 pound reducing valve atomizer air switch and boiler fuel spray. From the in between the cutout switch and the braking system from the number 2 reserve goes into the horn and the strainer or windshield wipers. Also, following the air compressor back through the number 2 reserve may make a loop back to the which back to the governor, back in through into the intake fuelers of the air compressor. Alright, the cast iron piston is fitted with the 4 piston, 2 piston rings, and oil rings have been wrist pin. Oil the ring below the wrist pin. Oil piston rings should be applied with the scraping edge toward the crankrest. The piston wrist rings, floating type of the are supported with the connection rod. The bronze brassing of the wrist pins is prevented with the house having excessive movement of the bit, retaining the rings which snap at the recess of the piston of the preventing the wrist pin working out against cylinder wall. The meeting of the main bearings of the radial ball with the ball type 1 of each, and then the crankshaft. They are lubricated with throw off the connection of the rod bearings oil seat provided with the end of each of the crankshaft to prevent the oil leakage. Also guard itself against the entrance of the dirt, and therefore the 2 inlet valves, the 1 exhaust valve of each of the low pressure cylinder and the high pressure cylinder. They are double washer type and all located in the compressor headlight and the compressor crankcase. Vented the means of the breadth of the wet with the cap of the air quality of the copper is supported between the suitable screens retained in the place means of the snap rings to breathe its fitted. The check valve also ranges the pressure of the crankcase will be relieved. The atmosphere tendency of the air or the flow of the outside of the compressor of the crankcase is prevented with the check valve is seated in the quiet operation. Intake strainers. The 2 intake strainers from one each of the low pressure cylinders are cartridge type, which permanent to remove the cylinder element with the necessity of dismounting and disconnecting through the air compressor, the air pressure through the strainer, which enters the compressor in the intake. This is a oil implemented type of the air filter with the filter unit, filter housing, and filter units. This is the air compressor, which shows is a SKO motor, air intake filters, underload valve, safety valve, as in lube oil fill cap with the crankshaft and the crankcase, oil drainage plug, and oil level intercooler level. The intercooler is a compressor with a compound type of the filter intercooler through the discharge of air from each of the low pressure cylinders makes an intake to the high pressure cylinders. They use the intercooler to reduce the temperature to discharge the air and improve the voltmetric power efficiency of the compressor. Intercooler is the radiator employing the bind of the copper mounted between the cast iron and the headers. The intercooler is divided into 2 halves from one of each of the lower pressure. The lower pressure discharging air enters into the air enters into the intercooler through the side of the side header leading to the top of the upper header directed through the part of the tubes, and the half of the interlocking back of the remaining tubes is that in the halfway. In this way, the air with the low pressure cylinder is directed through the half of the intercooler and passing for the high pressure of the cylinder. The air has traveled approximately twice the length of an intercooler tubing. Suitable baffles are employed to ensure that air follows. The path desired after passing the tubes and entering the common passage leading to the intercooler safety valve to the inside of the high pressure cylinder. 2 safety valves employed to protect the intercooler against the excessive pressure. Safety valves are set at the 60 psi relief valve of the MRS intercooler are set at the 55 psi. Lubrication. The compressor has its own pressure lubricating system. The oil carried in the base of the equipped to the gauge filter, drain the connector, the filter, breather. The oil system is arranged with the oil system under the pressure to circulate with the oil pump. The oil pump is driven with the eccentric at one end of the crankshaft. The pump combines with the piston of the valve operating at the oil. The pump of the body is arranged with the lubricating oil pressure drilled opening the crankshaft. The oil supplied with the pump filter with the filter consists of the housing of the incorporating the fine screen strainer in the large area through the oil withdrawn with the weight of the oil pump body. The screen strainer that is held by the space of the screen retainer must be removed if the screen can be removed. The oil gauge should also show approximately 15 psi at 500 RPMs, or should also pressure the idling speed of the oil pressure relieving the mounted into the crankshaft hard towards the intercooler in providing the protecting the oil pump and the associated parts of excessive oil pressure. 118. The compressor central control. Motor-driven compressor is a control with the master governor, which operates the line switch of the power circuit. The power circuit is closed, but the compressor runs with the pressure drops predetermined minimum. The circuit opening, stopping the compressor when the pressure is related to the predetermined maximum. The type of the compressor is used in electrical motors. Because of the each compressor is directly connected with the engine compressor, the continuous operation, although always pumping whether the engine is running requires the load or unload the typical control of for the maintained reservoir pressure, the desired limits of the low too low pressure and one high express pressure cylinders equipped with the loaders that are controlled by the governor. There are arrangements when the compressor restored with the pressure of the reserve system, the desired points of the committed pressure unloaded to cause the delivery air main pressure tapered opening can cap nut in each of these under load cylinders connects the copper to the pipe header of the lead of the compressor. Governors the compressor has built the desired pressure of the main reserve. Governors emit the main reserve air through the tapped opening of the cap nut of the face of the unloaded valve. The pressure immediately moves under the load of the valve towards the cylinder carrying the intercooler pressure to seal the valve. This is in turn to access the unloader plunger, which is part of the plunger and head with the fingers of the prongs of the lower side of these prongs. Extend through the openings inlet valve of the sheet with the pressure emitted with the described above the fingers which push the inlet valve of the sheet of the compressor is unloaded with the compression. No compression takes place as long as the inlet valve of the head is open. The complete movement of the unloader valve of the main reserve pressure sure fitted acted results of the seating and the preventing leakage of the main reserve as the unloader assembly for the atmospheric pressure. When the pressure is main reserve with the drop at the point of the desired to cause the compressor to operate with the governor as assumed is the output position when the vent main reservoir facing the unloader valve with the return of the unload springs then move the unloader valve outward of the carrying with the unloader plunger of the fingers of the prongs which unseated the valve spring and the compressor presumed the delivery in the main air to the main reserve. The air compressor governor type of the NS16, the pneumatic double safety valve type consists of two distinct portions, the operating portion and the pipe bracket. The pipe connection with the compressor of the main reserve is provided with the pipe bracket so that the operating portion may be removed for the repair's replacement without breaking any of the piping joints. The operating portion casting that made of the HP and LP, the adjusting screws of the HP section is used to regulate the point of the air compressor cutout, and the unloading of the point with the adjusting screw with the LP section is used to regulate the point of the air compressor, the cutting and loading point. Therefore, it is adjusting the two pressures with the adjusting the governor when adjusting the governor, the high pressure when the governor unloads the compressor, the low pressure when the governor loads the compressor. If all compressors of the multiple unit locomotive that unload the simultaneously, governor functions are as air operated as switches the control of the magnet valve. Each locomotive, the magnet valve controls the flow of the main reserve pressure of the air compressor. Unloaded roll valve, the unit in the control circuit of the magnet, the valve of the train line, and air. All units is connected with the multiple. So when the pressure is sufficient low to a unit to end the compressor, the compressor are loaded at the same time. All compressors are thereby required to share the load. 119. The air brake system. Generally, the sturdy, quick air-acting remote controlled braking equipment should be impossible to operate modern train. The air has been used to be operated the brake of the train for such a long time, with such a record of the performance importance of proper maintenance operation initially apparent with however the absent essential personnel who have anything to do with the train handling directly and indirectly through the understanding of the basic principle of the highly important to train control. Crews must be able to be required of the brake test to ensure the system will remain in the operating order to operate the brakes to ensure that the results under different conditions existing in the track, locomotive, and train maintenance are been the concern with the internal construction of the equipment. Many improvements have been made to design in order to various modern needs. Proficient, appropriate manufacturing instruction manuals necessary for the adequate understanding any specific installation information which follows the given basic understanding that has many broad applications. A clear distinction must be made between the following principles type of the air brake system: the automatic air brake system. The automatic air brake system controls both locomotive and train brakes and consists of the chiefly compressed the supply air, the reserve to store the adequate supply of the air, the governor to control the compressor, pumping, duplex pressure cages, the brake cylinders when the piston applies to the brake, thoroughly mechanically linked and called the brake rigging, distributing valve of the automatically independent brake valve, and control the flow of the air, the reserve of the brake pipe, pressure maintained to the brake pipe, entirely the train operating, reduction in the pressure applied to the brake with increasing the pressure, release of the brake on the rear cars of the long trains respond much sooner as improved the automatic equipment, the straight air brake of the system, and there is protected against the leak with the brake with the pipe broken hose connection. Additional equipment on each of the cars of the train consists of auxiliary reserve, which also holds the air of the brake of the cylinder and the trip of the valve, which responds to the change of the train brake pipe pressure of the main array, which emits the prop air auxiliary reserve of the brake cylinder. The straight air brake system utilizes the air compressor in reserve for the locomotive to supply the air pressure to the brake cylinders to each of the car in the train. The system necessarily flows in action in the automatic system because the pressure may be built the passage air to the locomotive reserved for the last car on the train. The independent air brake control system locomotive brakes and no means of the separate valve of the brake pedestal. Decrease the brake pipe pressure applies to the brake, increase the brake pipe, the pressure releases the brake. The system is not satisfactory to the train more than a few car lengths of the shifting car of the industrial plants of the working trains because of the car brakes and operating, which causes the rough operation and slow stops. Independent air brakes and independent and air automatic systems. Locomotives independent and automatic systems installed with them to attain great flexibility in the control of the two brake valves. The operator of the position called the independent and automatic brake valve. The independent brake valve controls the locomotive brakes only. The automatic brake valve controls the locomotive and train brakes. Locomotive and brakes applied with the locomotive brakes are applied with the release independently. Train brakes in conjunction with the train brakes is not necessary to use one brake valve at a time. 5. The vacuum brake system, the MRS road switcher, other than the diesel electrical locomotive military fleet, which are designed for foreign services, equipped with or can be equipped with a vacuum brake valve in order to handle the trains oversee with other rolling stock equipped with the vacuum brake system. The train vacuum brake operation, the compressed air brake system is on out of the vacuum brake connected. The locomotive and the train automatic brakes are controlled with the vacuum brake and the independent brake valve. The independent brake by the independent brake valve handle. Details method of the operation of vacuum brakes on such locomotives contained in tm55203chapter12. 120 air brakes. In addition with the compressor governor reserve of the brake valve, the previous mentioned, the personnel should be familiar with many of the systems. Each of the part of the system must be individually studied with the typical examples of given below. The cocks are used, the various cutout cocks are best understood with the study of the actual piping diagram. Some of the instances of schematic drawings and multiple operation breaks of the trailing units and full operative controls are out. The cutout and the brakes are operated with the engine leading unit with the automatic brake valve. The double heading and the pushing operation. Much of the multi-unit operation must be locomotive not coupled to each of the other engine subordinate locomotives. Necessary to release the brake to keep the wheels and operating locomotive applying the train brakes and deadheading operation locomotive brakes and actual brakes of the train. Gauges. The duplex gauge of the air gauges, two type of the pipe connections, two dial indications equalizing reserve pressure and main reserve pressure are indicated on one of the gauge. Brake pipe pressure and locomotive brake cylinder pressure and they indicated with the other gauges. C. Equalizing reservoir. Equalizing reservoir adds the volume of the space above the equalizing piston of the brake valve. The reduction of the brake pipe with the pressure properly during the service of a pre-application of the brakes. Disturbing the valve. A disturbing valve, when actuated, the brake valve permits the flow of the locomotive brake cylinder, maintains the brake cylinder pressure gauge link when the air brakes the air applied with the piston on the permits the excess of the brake cylinder atmosphere with the releasing of the brakes. The feed valve automatically maintains the predetermined measure of the brake pipe. The F reducing valve. The reducing valve reduces the main reserve pressure for the straight air operation for the air signal system. Q. The quick release valve. The quick release valve is rapid release of the brake cylinder during the release operation. Emergency brake valve. The valve is found in the locomotive is provided with the brake pipe. Airline is provided the means of the quickly venting of the brake pipe to show the discharge opening of the atmosphere. It operates the link of the operates like the operator's conductor's emergency valve found in the caboose. Although a pull cord attached to the operating lever is lifted. Located at the cab above the fireman's position left side with the cord pulled, the operating level trips the operating valve, obtaining the emergency brake valve application. When the cord is released, the valve will reset, preventing the further loss of the brake and the pipe in the air. The valve should be only emergency when the emergency brake valve application cannot be obtained by the automatic brake valve. 121 air brake operation. Charging the system inadequate. Supply with the necessary to operate with the brake system under some of the questions may take from 5 to 10 minutes to build the air pressure normal to the brakes pipe of the long train and the long train has been made with the cars that completed with the system and it makes 30 minutes to charge the entire system by placing the reserve lever on the off position, advancing the throttle to the reverse up to the engines of the pump with a fast rate to reduce the time necessary of charge system. This can be done while the train is coasting as well as a standstill. Independent automatic brake valve position, the independent brake valve controls the locomotive brakes independently. Train brakes as an off-self lapping type, and the independent brake valve has two positions: release and brake, and the surface application of the latter spans the operating ranges, which will enable the engine to secure the desired braking effect. The brake valve handle keeps it release position during the movement of the locomotive. To the 6LBL equipment, the 6th position of the automatic brake valve. The release position. The release position. The purpose of the position is to provide a large direct passage for the main reserve of the brake pipe. It is understood the circumstance to be the release of the train of the brakes. However, and the value is limited, it may have the railroad to have the abandoned to use entirely. If the handle we are allowed to remain in the position at any length of time, the brake system will charge the main reserve pressure. Avoid the handle must be moved in the running position to prevent the engine man from getting the small part of the discharge main reserve air atmosphere in the release portion sufficient noise to attract the attention of the handle position. To the running position. This is the proper position handle for the charging of the brake pipe or the releasing of the train brakes, and the position large direct passage connection to the field valve pipe, the brake pipe, so the latter charges under the feed of the valve. Control cannot be under the pressure above which the feed valve adjusts the equalizing reserve. Charges in uniformly with the brake pipe, keeping the pressure on the two sides of the equalizing piston and equalizing, distributing the valve release pipe of the release air in the atmosphere. C3. The service position. The position gives the gradual reduction of the brake pipe pressures to cause the service application. 4. Lap position. The position is used loading of the brakes applied with the service application until the desire to move further. Brake pipe reduction to release them, and all ports are closed. 6. Holding position. The position so the name of the locomotive brakes and the pipe with the train brakes are released, and their auxiliary reserves and recharge feed value pressure. Emergency position. The position used the most proper the heavy application of the brakes required a large direct communication between the brake pipe and the atmosphere. The direct passage makes a sudden heavy discharge brake pipe, causing the air brake valve to distributing the valve to move the emergency position, given the maximum brake force of the shortest possible time in the position. Locomotive brake cylinder. The pressure maintained with the equal leakage main reservoir pressure permitted to the flow inside the pipe in the case of the cylinder. Sanders are connected with the brake valve and emergency valve operations. Operating the practice. The following general method of handling the practice is doing their aptly rigidly all conditions, but all including the broadening and the scope of the general information of the basic study. When not in use, to carry the automatic brake valve while in running position, independent brake valve in the released position. To apply this breakers and services, move the handle automatic brake valve service position, making the required brake pipe reduction, then to the lap position, which is used in holding the air brakes applied. It is the rule of safety is to comply with the stop before the release and the brake of the freight train, especially with the long one, rather than attempt the release of the low speed. However, the conditions permit the release while the motion of the brake valve should be moved to the running position to release and recharge the system. If there is a problem with another application, be assured that enough pressure is enabled to enable the compressor to charge the line with the brake shoes as are needed. A train overshoots the stop signal, run a mountain and overcharge. The requirements are not covered. Carefully observed. If the releasing is desired to hold the locomotive brake applied after the train brake releases, move the handle of the holding instead of the running position. Release the locomotive brake and the movement of the handle to the running position, leaving it there, graduating off the circumstances required. The abort successive requirements of successive movement in between the holding and the running of the positions. To apply with the brake shoes, emergency with the handle automatic brake valve quickly to the emergency position, even if they're on train stop. 6. When using the independent brake valve, the handling of the automatic brake valve should be carried in the running position. The independent application, the release of the moving the independent brake valve, handling the release of the position. When all the brakes are applied automatically, the locomotive brake can be gradually off or released. Depressing the independent brake valve handle in the release position. The red handle is one of the air gauge will show all the times the pressure in the locomotive brake cylinders in the hand. This hand should be watched for the brake manipulation. Depressing the independent air brake handle will release the position and quickly release the locomotive brake under any of all conditions. The brake valve has no slow application position or should be taken to prevent the harsh slack action when the handling along stringing cars. The train brakes should be invariable by applied with the detaching of the locomotive holding for the train with the handbrakes when necessary. Setting of the handbrakes is especially important into the grade. The automatic brake should never be used in the locomotive train while standing, even where the locomotive is detached from longer than 10 minutes. and not at all in the grade of very steep. The condition of the brake is not good. The safest method of hand brakes is only to keep the auxiliary reserve and the fully charged the guard against the start from the brake of the leaking and off the ready to obtain the part of the full braking immediately and of the starting. 9. The independent brake is very important. The safety feature is in the connection. It will hold the locomotive to heavy terrain of the fairly steep grade. If its automatically brakes are released, the slack is prevented with running in or out depending on the tendency of the grade ever given in the locomotive. 10. When leaving the locomotive while doing the work about it when it was standing, always leave the independent brake valve handle in the application position. 11. After an emergency application, the brakes will run over the road due to any cause of the intended operation of the engine man. Move the automatic brake valve handle to the lap position, prevent loss of main reserve power pressure. After the train stops, the cause of the application should be located to redeem the proceeding before leaving the roundhouse. The engine man should try to brake through both of the valves and see the non-serious leaks exist. The pipes between the disturbing valve and the air brake should be absolutely tight. The safety valve operation adjustment should be tested at time arrival terminal. To determine adjust the safety valve, move the automatic brake valve into the emergency position. After the safety valve over, return the brake valve to the lap position. Note that the pressure at the safety valve when closed, the safety valve should be adjusted to 68 pounds. It always assumed the test is always made by the locomotive alone. This is before the brake pipe is connected to the train. When the two locomotives are coupled together, the brake pipe has hose must be coupled between the two locomotives. Their angle cocks should be open where there are two or more locomotives in train. The instructions are already given the interchange so far as the leading locomotive, the locomotive for which the brakes are could be operated and concerned. On the second locomotive closes the brake pipe, setting up the cutout cock of the desired trailing position. Place handles an automatic brake valve in running position and independent brake valve in the release position. The brakes of the second locomotive that can be operated. The first locomotive the same those in the train. If the engine on the second locomotive finds it necessary, if it prevents the application of the brake of the second locomotive, depressing the independent brake valve handle in the release position. Also, the brake of the second locomotive is applied with the danger of overheating the wheels, and the wheels should be sided to the brake release, depressing the independent brake valve and releasing the position. The brake applied reapplied later in an independent brake valve, handling in an unusual way provided with the handles and the independent automatic brake valve of the second locomotive. Are as before the release of the running position respectively at the operate position does not any interfere with the brake of the second locomotive. The pressure of the brake cylinders on the second locomotive should never be reduced except for the absolute necessary. Safety, dead man control. The dead man control is a safety device, usually a foot valve, which must be depressed at all times when locomotive operation, unless the surface application of the air brakes approximately 20 pounds per pipe reduction in any force. Safeguards are incapacitated against the incapacitation, negation, operation, release of dead man, and corresponding manuals causes a warning whistle to sound approximately 4 seconds after which the brakes are automatically applied. A brake application avoided with the dead man pedal depressed again with the warning period of individual installation varying the braking, emergency and service application power interruption of the engine and return to the idle automatically safe. You control application. It may be necessary to operate the idle and use the movement in the throttle. Part 4, Diesel Electric Locomotive, Chapter 13, Structural Factors.